Hello and welcome to Authors Die Twice, a podcast on video games and aesthetic theory hosted by two living failures. I'm Nathan Weinstein, and with me today, as always, he's off Nathan Avenue, but now stuck in the most literal horny jail of all time. It's Brian Counter.
Yeah, thank you.
I feel
Yeah.
like just this is one of the funny effects of playing a classic game, 25 years later for the first time. But people have must have been making that horny jail joke for decades now, right? Or at least as long as the phrase has existed. Um, because James does end up in a prison, right? For having whatever, for stooping so low as to have carnal desires during whatever the period of his life we're revisiting is here.
Yeah, so I just got to the where I left off was when you uh is her name Laura, the girl like kind of locks you in that cell sort of thing, and then you just kind of reemerge yet again in like just a once again like shittier version of the hospital that you've been in, right? Um, or am I wrong? Is that
I think that's right. So I'm realizing then, so have you not
I'm
gotten to the jail? Are you still on Nathan
I
Avenue?
think I'm still in the hospital, although this is maybe something we can when we do talk about the Bennett Sims story, there is this kind of question of hospital as jail or vice versa in the story that maybe I do think there's some interesting stuff happening between the game and the story in terms of like location and just how, perceptually some of the locations feel like they can double as certain things, but
Absolutely. Yeah, and I've just to step back, like we're planning to talk more about Silent Hill 2 remake today, but we're also going to talk about the 2023 or the Bennett Sims story, the postcard from
Mhm.
his book. Is it Other Minds?
Yeah, other minds and other stories.
Yeah, published in 2023. That is in many ways an homage to Silent Hill 2. And there is, I would say that just touching on it quickly before we dig into the story at greater length later, I think that that kind of transforming image that features heavily of a building that might be a factory, it might be a hospital, it might be a prison, is like one of the most suggestive and powerful parts of that whole story.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. But yeah, no, let me just maybe I can just start by talking a little bit about playing this game sort of over the past couple weeks because I have played a significant amount more of it than when we first recorded last week. And it's kind of interesting thinking about, and I know at one point I kind of asked you about this, like how far into the game I am, and I think you said like maybe a fifth, and I said, wow, it does. I do think because, as we mentioned last time, like because the game demands so much of your attention, it feels, I feel like I've been playing it for much longer than I actually have, you know. I've probably still put in definitely like under 10 hours. It's not like I've been playing this game uh for that long, but it feels like it feels like a whole play, at least a whole playthrough's worth of the game, I guess.
Yeah. I now that you're 10 hours in, I have to ask, because we talked last pod about how the game was kind of getting under your skin,
Yeah.
still feeling unnerved or disturbed by the game, or has the sort of fear factor deadened a little bit?
I definitely think it has deadened a bit. I'm glad you brought that up because I was sort of thinking about that the other day. I mean, it's still very disturbing and still pretty terrifying, and there are still obviously uh jump scares, but I feel like at this point, because the jump scare aspect is a little like I'm a little bit desensitized to that. I feel maybe more deeply disturbed, I guess, if that sort of makes sense, like the things that are terrifying or disturbing about it are things that are lasting rather than these like instantaneous, like even when Pyramid Head threw me down the sort of elevator shaft or whatever it was, when you get up to the roof, like even that, I was startled for a second, but then just kind of that almost felt to me more like a Resident Evil moment than a Silent Hill moment, if that makes sense. Like,
Oh, For sure.
less
Yeah.
less scary, if that,
Yeah, it's a very Resident Evil moment, where the kind of pursuer super enemy ambushes you and throws you into a new area. I mean, that's like straight out of like the new Resident Evil games,
Yeah.
and the old ones. But I would say I had a similar experience where I was pretty disturbed early in the game and pretty just sort of skittish and anxious. And as the game progressed, you sort of realize like there aren't that many categories of scares, and the creatures are, I mean, it's amazing creature design, but they're also quite repetitive. You just kind of fight the same like three enemies over and over again.
Yeah.
And there is a sense in which like the locations themselves are so beautifully terrifying and gross. And maybe we can talk more about like what makes a place like the Woodside Apartments so scary. You know, for at least for me at least, I think they're far scarier than like a gothic, your classic tropes of gothic horror, castles or whatever, like old woods or old Victorian homes. It's these institutional buildings, these tenements, hospital, prison, that have this sort of kind of anonymity, right? And sort of homogeneity baked in that's like a sort of derelict homogeneity. That's like that for me, that's just a very upsetting aesthetic. Um,
Yeah.
but but the despite the just incredible triumph of like visual and environmental design, the things that populate them tend to not be that upsetting the further you go. You just get inured a little bit to the flesh face nurses and the leg monsters,
Yeah.
um, and the armless or the straitjacket creatures.
Mhm.
All of them individually, again, quite creepy on their own, but by dint of sheer repetition, you sort of get over it. And yet, as that level of sort of fear goes down, I think that the game gets conceptually more disturbing for sure.
Mhm.
Especially around the part where you are. I thought you were at the prison, but I guess you're still at the sort of the wet and dank version of the hospital. And we can talk
Yeah.
about like what it means to transition between the sort of I was playing this game with Sam Tet, who friend of the pod, and she called
Mhm.
it wet world. So you like you sort of are transitioning between wet world and dry world, basically. And it's sort of interesting to think about what that means without having a great handle on the Silent Hill lore. Um, but there
Yeah.
is a lot of stuff that's just like it it goes a bit deeper. Like the scares and the concepts and the uncanniness goes a bit deeper. It is like sort of more mental and again conceptual than sort of physical or bodily, as it is when you first start playing.
Yeah, I have sort of a bunch of thoughts about everything you just said. The first thing, I guess, starting with what you kind of just ended on is I'm curious. I guess this is just, personally for me as not having, finished my playthrough yet. I'm kind of curious about how many more repetitions of the same place, how many times that will happen throughout the game because it already, the apartments kind of already felt like that. And now I'm in like a just kind of another, you know, nastier version of the hospital. And I wonder if that's going to just kind of continue happening and whatever other new places I get to. Um, about the enemies, yeah, I mean, I totally, at first, when I was first playing, I think one of the disturbing things was just kind of uh or one of the really unnerving things was sort of, those kind of straight-jacketed enemies are just like, visually disturbing and before I kind of understood their move set and how to evade them or how fast they were, things like that. It was actually stressful to like encounter them, but now when I see one of those, I'm glad that it's not, I'm glad that it's not a mannequin or the sort of nurse, featureless nurse enemies because those are much more difficult. I mean, yeah, even them too, like even the more difficult regular enemies at this point are just kind of a nuisance, which is kind of funny to think about, because the repetition turns this like totally grotesque, like just ridiculously disturbing enemy into something where you just kind of, I feel like saying to myself like, ah, man, one of these guys again, like,
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the true, I mean, these sort of psychosexual nightmare masterpieces, like for those who haven't played it, like there's like a leg monster that's like a sort of sexualized legs that and torso, and then it just repeats on top. So it's like two legs, and then instead of arms, you have two more legs that sort of act as arms and kind of poke you or hit you. I don't think they don't have feet. The upper legs don't have feet.
yeah.
And then there are these nurses who are like sort of again like sexualized nurses. I mean, clearly originating from James's own sort of psyche. Again,
Mhm.
he's in horny jail. And they have these faces that are just like these bulbous, featureless like pods almost, or like it's like kind of like a giant. What would you even call it? Just like a giant sort of like featureless growth instead of a face. I mean, these things
So
are truly disturbing, and yet they do start to become essentially Goombas, you know?
yeah, yeah,
You're like,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
here I am going through this like abstract space. It's like, all right, Goomba on the left, Goomba on the right. Like, let me just kind of like beat one to death with a crowbar and then shotgun the other one. Like, no big deal. Let me go on and solve this puzzle. They really do just become sheer, like pure abstract obstacles where you're not even thinking about their features or their behavior. I would say the one place where that is not true is in the original Silent Hill 2. This
Mhm.
is something I didn't finish that game. I hope to. I plan on going back and finishing it. Um, but even in like the 2 or 3 hours that I played, I was upset every single time I encountered the straitjacketed enemies. They're these humanoid figures whose like arms are sort of like again, just sort of psychosexual, like phantasmagoria, like these creatures with their faces are obscured, right? And then their hands are like they're like straitjacket to their genitals, basically.
Yeah.
Um, and they sort of headbutt you and they vomit on you. Um, but if you knock them on the ground or take them out, they start crawling around on the ground.
Hmm.
And the way they crawl in the remake is, it's creepy, whatever, but it's pretty human. Like they're sort of behaving like humanoids. Um, in the original game, it is absolute nightmare fuel because when they start crawling, they behave exactly like cockroaches. So they're much faster. They're much faster. But what really sells it and what the kind of the stroke of brilliance, I think, is that they'll move really, really fast on the ground like bugs, and then they'll freeze. And as you're like chasing them around, there's no tracking. You can't there's no aim assist like there is in the remake with your stick. So you're just like flailing around and these things will just freeze in the corner of a room, and then you get close to them and then they start skittering around again like at full speed. And so you're like running around just like this horrible tenement apartment, like trying to catch this roach mannequin monster. And it's like doing that thing that bugs do where they like have basically two modes. It's like ultra fast and completely still.
Yeah, yeah.
And it gets under my skin so bad, like it makes me shudder. It really upsets me. Every single time I dread them. I dread them because it's hard. I didn't, I, the controls are really giving me trouble, and I never quite figured out the rhythms of the original. And so maybe there's some trick to that I'm missing. But I dreaded them both on the gameplay level because they were very hard to dispatch once they get on the ground,
Right.
but also just on a kind of visual level, they were just really gross.
Yeah, I mean that's like a couple of good points or things to kind of pick up on that seem to be core principles of the game, which is like definitely I guess time and motion or like time and movement, both in terms of I mean, I guess specifically in terms of the enemies, but also, you mentioned roaches. There are these like disgusting rooms that you'll go into that have roaches all over the wall, and there is a nice effect that the game does where if you shine your flashlight on them, they'll kind of like go to the edges of the flashlight's range, right? Like they're avoiding the light, which is a nice kind of dynamic thing. Um, but one of the other things that you mentioned, like anonymity, I guess in terms of the locations, but I mean, obviously, all of the enemies are, at once like look exactly the same but also have no features, right? Like so they're totally anonymous. And I know that, maybe this is jumping ahead a little bit, and this is just a different sort of tie-in, but it strikes me now that we're talking about this and knowing that, the postcard by Bennett Sims is, as he actually said in an interview I did with him, he said it was a way of working through his experience playing the game,
Mm.
writing that story, and that is. But he has another story that I really love that's in the same collection, that maybe we can talk about a different time, called Portonaccio Sarcophagus. And it's a lot of it is a meditation on this sarcophagus that has a few of the central figures in it just have totally smooth faces, so they have these featureless faces. And I wonder if he was also thinking about the game when he was writing that. It's a pretty different story, but yeah, I think like something about that, right? Something about this like facelessness, uh, and this is actually when I teach his work and specifically Portonaccio sarcophagus, there's something about that is very, I think the way I put it to my students is that, the facelessness is almost like more disturbing than, a glaring, monster or something like that.
Yeah.
And this is obviously, something I'm sure we both find pretty interesting about, weird fiction or psychological horror or whatever. I mean, a lot of times it's actually like stuff that doesn't happen, or things that happen, but there's no kind of explanation for them, that is the most, can kind of be the most disturbing. And I guess just in a formal sense, like the face, especially as a site of, identity and recognition, just having that be totally obscured. And I mean, even I was noticing, the more I play, the more I notice that sort of as you approach them, those bubblehead nurse things, not only are their faces totally like blank, or their heads, I guess, are just totally, uh featureless, but they also like shake their heads really, really fast, in a way that, does remind me of, I don't know, like a like a, something that you would see in a haunted house, or like maybe like a music video for like a metal band or something like that, like when they shake their head so fast that it's just like physically impossible to actually do. So it almost feels like time lapse or something, which
Yeah,
which
or a
also,
glitch. Like,
yeah,
those glitches where assets start vibrating or just shaking like
yeah.
at insane speeds. And there was one time in my playthrough when that actually happened to one of those. And it was one of those great moments where like the glitch was replicating precisely the distinguishing effect of the enemy.
Oh
So
wow.
the corpse of a nurse, and she just started just convulsing, at a not a sort of corporeal like or human speed, but at just an inhuman kind of mechanistic like rapidity where she's just like vibrating and vibrating so fast on the ground.
Well,
But it was just like a collision glitch or something. Like she she was sort of clipping and her arms were sort of flailing around. But that's exactly what those enemies do, like what they're meant to do when you're fighting them. They have this sort of glitch effect.
right.
I was gonna say too, like the connection you just drew between the anonymity of the faces and then the anonymity of the spaces is really cool. And I feel like we could pause and just like unpack how those different sort of parallels work.
Sure.
Because for one, um, you're totally right. There's like again, so we were talking about like motivated and non-motivated glitchiness or like intended and unintended glitchiness. I
Right.
think motivated is the better idea because like or the more useful term because it's about like what has a in-universe justification or just a justification in reality. So games are already just full of doppelgangers and repetition, right? That's just a basic fact of the medium. So games are, I mean, inherently, this is something we've talked about, inherently uncanny insofar as like spaces are constantly repeating or objects or assets are constantly repeating that would not repeat at that degree of specificity in real life.
Right.
Um, but there are certain types of spaces that have a built-in level of homogeneity, like a tenement complex or an apartment building. Um, and then there are things like an individual person, even we might say like an individual creature or entity with a featureless face, like still maybe shouldn't repeat in the exact same way, because they're an entity, because they're an individual.
Right.
But then you have something like the hospital, which is a space that's internally homogeneous,
Yeah.
internally anonymous, but also maybe shouldn't necessarily repeat as an entire unit. And so one thing that's striking between the apartment complex and the hospital is that we have, in both cases, you go through the sort of real world, which is still the dream world because you're in Silent Hill, but the sort of more real version of the space. And then you go through the wet world or dank, moldy, gross version, slimy version of the space.
Yeah.
And I think in Silent Hill, that's called the other world. So you're
Uh,
passing into the other world, which is like the darker, the world of darkness or something.
right.
What's really weird, and what I was trying to get my head around, again, I didn't look into I'm Mr. No lore, I guess, so I didn't look into the lore for why this happens. But the other world of the apartments is Blue Creek Apartments, right? There's Woodside Apartments and Blue Creek Apartments.
Mhm.
But Blue Creek Apartments is a physical space. Like if you look at the map, you can see there are two mirrored apartment complexes, which is something that happens in real life and is actually quite obviously happens in real life. And it's kind of weird when that happens. Like it sort of creeps me out when I see that. Like when, you see an apartment building and then the identical structure next to it. And
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
these two Titanic, sometimes they're like sublime skyscrapers, and there's two of them. And it's
Right.
like, how can there be two of this enormous thing,
Yeah.
Um, and that's true of Blue Creek. It would seem to be true of Blue Creek and Woodside, even though the way you transition between them is this kind of like portal. Like, James steps in between the two buildings and kind of crosses this threshold in
Yeah.
this very unnatural spatial transition. Like no architect would design a building that was like, on the fifth floor or third floor, um, you just step over a 2 foot gap that goes all the way down to ground level, and then you step through a door basically, but it's like the edge of a train platform into the train cabin, and then you're in the other world.
Yeah.
So the apartment complex is sort of motivated. It makes sense. It has like a real world, whatever justification in Silent Hill 2, even though as you move between those two repeated buildings or repeated assets, even you are moving between different states of reality. But as far as I know, the hospital has no twin hospital. It just in the hospital, like you go to the otherworld hospital and you're in this kind of like you're in like just mirror dark world or something. But it's not like if you look at the Silent Hill map, and I could be wrong, but I don't remember this, that there's like actually a second hospital next to the one you're in. So there's even a kind of inconsistency there that like it's like, well, how does the other world work? Does it need to have a physical space in this reality that gets corrupted by the other world, or is it rather like two separate planes of reality that you could sort of shuttle between? Kind
Yeah.
of like Stranger Things. Have you seen the show Stranger Things? Uh,
Yeah. A little bit of it. Yeah.
Yeah, where there's like it's called the Upside Down in that uh universe, and it's like the same exact world as reality, but it's also wet world actually. But that's not there's no like the Upside Down in as far as I remember in Stranger Things doesn't also exist on the same plane. Like there wouldn't be a physical mirror space. You're actually tr crossing some threshold of reality to get to that mirror world.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point or a great question. I think that actually kind of already happens in subtle ways in the apartments already. I can't remember if it was the first or the second of the apartments, but I remember there's like one room that sort of each time you go back to it after some kind of, triggering event that you do or whatever, the apartment just gets like nastier. And it's not just simply like, it's not just that things are moved around or that someone's been in there, but it just gets like more disgusting.
Mhm.
I don't know if you remember that, but that also seems to kind of like, mess a little bit with the logic of these kind of mirror places, right? Because that can already happen in one specific room. So I guess like,
Yeah, yeah.
you
There's like
know,
an internal kind of like degradation or deterioration that happens in certain spaces too. And in fact, I guess I'll call it the final dungeon, the final location that you traverse, which is pretty involved. And it it has this effect where instead of going into the mirror world, I think you're the sort of this sort of pristine hotel just gradually gets more and more ruined as
Mhm.
you trigger certain story progression events. So it
Yeah.
starts out as looking like a totally pretty well kept, hotel, and then by the end of it, it's just like a derelict space full of mold and falling apart.
Yeah. I mean, we did talk last time about how, about how smelly this game is.
Yeah.
And I do want to keep it anchored still in this idea of maybe like anonymity and repetition. But I do think there's something to be said or something that we can maybe try to draw a little bit more out about like why it is that this kind of decay is, um, yeah, I don't know, specifically this kind of like moldy fungus, decay is paired with all of these as you said, like kind of psychosexual elements in the game,
Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, that is a trope of horror, right? I mean, things being muddy or dirty or underground or whatever. But just the fact that that happens sort of in real time, like it's not just that um, I guess I'm still just kind of fascinated by that particular room, and I do think uh it's in one of the apartment buildings, but it starts off, I'm pretty sure, as like a really nice looking apartment, and then just, you keep coming back to it, and it just gets like, stuff gets broken, and there's just kind of it gets darker and kind of nastier and things like that.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
fact that
Oh, go
happens,
ahead.
like it's not simply, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not simply just like a setting that is nasty. It's a setting that becomes nasty or that, like uh almost after you kind of complete some kind of uh triggering event or whatever, it's like your reward essentially is that you like go back to the same place and it's just like really gross.
Yeah, it's like congratulations. Here's the shittier version of the room you were just in.
Yeah.
It does make me think of like there's so much here actually that should sort of unpack because we're already on the topic of like uncanny repetition, replication in space. Um but there's also a kind of replication effect in time. And there's the game is doing that on multiple axes all at once, all in a quite intentional and motivated way. But the first one to mention is just the way in which yeah, like these moments where in the hotel at the end of the Lakeview Hotel or in maybe this room that I'm forgetting, but what you're describing sounds just like how it works at the end of the game, where like certain triggers hit and the room sort of becomes just sort of slides into deeper disrepair. It is like you're also inhabiting the same space at multiple points in time.
Right.
know? And it reminds me of actually, so one of the most brilliant single levels of any game I've ever played in my life is this level called A Crack in the Slab in Dishonored 2. Have you played the Dishonored games?
No, I have not.
Yeah, they're amazing. Maybe we should probably talk about them at some point. But A Crack in the Slab is this level where you go to this mansion. I think it's like a man, yeah, it's a mansion. Um, and you have the ability to go back in time. Or so you're in the sort of ruined version of the mansion in the current day, but you can go back to its heyday when it was like opulent and full of guards and people.
Mhm.
And not only, I mean, there's a time travel level in the game Titanfall 2 that gets a lot of pub, like people at least back in like the 20, late 2010s. This there was kind of a common reference point in level design. It's like, oh, mind blowing, this level where you just like press a button and you go back in time and can jump between two states of this one location totally seamlessly, instantaneously. Um, but A Crack in the Slab does the same thing, but does it so much better. Partly because when it's in first person, it's a Bethesda game. It actually looks a lot like Skyrim or Oblivion. You can see the past version of the space through it's like a little mirror that you're holding up. So you're walking around in first person, right? And then you have this like basically looking glass that wherever you point it is showing you that world, the same mansion, but at a different point in time. And then all you do is just press a button, and then you just instantaneously in real time transfer to that place.
Mhm.
So um, I wonder how it's working on like how the actual like the design structure in terms of the virtual design and space is working there. I would be curious to know if it's about changing the state of one space or actually just shuttling you between two completely different locations. So basically that whereas in the fiction of the game you're moving between two points in time in the actual guts of the game, maybe you're moving between two literal spaces, two literal, that is virtual spaces. You know, the developers made the level, right? They designed the space when it was um, destroyed and when it was intact.
Yeah.
So like that time transition through space could also be, rather transition through time could also be transition through actual space. Um, and the last point here, I'm sorry, I'm going like I'm sort of going for a while here, but that there's a vu mechanic in Silent Hill 2. Have you encountered that yet? So
Uh,
sometimes games will see something and the camera angle will change and there will be like a weird it's actually for me like it's like the perfect deja vu sound cue. Like I knew it was deja vu even before it was explained to me because it just kind of tickles your brain in an unpleasant way and it just
yeah,
felt
yeah.
like a
These are
deja
the
vu.
moments where you just like see something click and then it kind of just shows it kind of zooms out a little bit and shows James looking at it, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, and there's a kind of like hum,
Yeah.
or kind of
Yeah.
tone that plays.
Yeah,
Um,
I found that just as a side note, I've kind of found that happening to me, like as a result of playing this game, like in my real life, like a couple of times I've just like, uh, I think just probably because partly the influence of the game and partly just like exhaustion or whatever, like certain
yeah.
moments, I'm just like, oh, this is what I'm like. I look at something and kind of like come back to, there's a moment where I like leave and then come back to myself, and it kind of it feels similar to what's happening in the game, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, I'm imagining you just like, walking into your kitchen and looking at your coffee mug and then going like, doing like a James-esque, huh, and then you sort of see yourself, you have an out-of-body experience of seeing yourself looking at your coffee mug
Yeah.
and then you're like back into it. I mean, I'm sorry, dude, that sounds, as someone who's suffered that like chronically before, it's actually it's really, really unpleasant.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is kind of funny to imagine. I mean, James is always just like so confused, as he's confused by literally everything.
I know
Uh,
we
it's just
definitely have to talk about that a little bit for sure. Yeah.
um, but do you know what those moments are actually doing or what they're signaling?
I mean, I imagine that there's going to be some kind of like reveal with them, right? I mean, especially, maybe I mean, a few of them are pretty, you know, not all of them, but like I'd say at least 25% of those moments are pretty dark,
Yeah.
it's not just him looking at something. There's like a moment where there's like bloody handprints that he's looking at. There's a moment where there's like a broken fence on the roof, which, seems kind of ominous. There's also a moment where it was one of those kind of one of the straitjacket enemies, but it had like high heels on.
Mhm.
Uh, and then I'm pretty sure like that just kind of appeared, and there was a moment where you had that deja vu thing with it, and then I'm pretty sure when I went back, it was gone. So there's also like weird stuff happening with maybe at least one, I guess. That's the only one I can think of right now, but at least one of those moments where it's like deja vu, but it also the object itself that triggers the deja vu, like kind of comes in and out of the frame, or like kind of
Mhm.
just like disappears. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying not to, I guess read ahead or look ahead too much because the game, I am finding it incredibly, engaging, right? Like I'm not upset that it takes so much of my attention, like I am actually, oddly, I do feel like, you know, engaged with it in a way that I would be if I was reading a novel or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. It's again, like we talked about this last time, but it's just such an absorbing experience. It is again novelistic in that way, where it just
Yeah.
demands a kind of total focus. Um, I'm gonna just spoil you a little bit.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
sorry. But one thing that I really love is that the game never reveals what those moments are doing.
Mm,
And I only learned this from watching an excellent video on YouTube, which I will send to you right now in the chat, from Dan Allen Gaming,
mm,
called 115 Incredible Little Details and Secrets in Silent Hill 2 Remake. And this is really like a video that honestly, this doesn't happen to me very often, but it just increased my appreciation for the game by a significant amount. Um, Partly just by revealing the incredible attention to detail that the developers took. It feels like like a peak Kojima Metal Gear game at the level of like the intricacy of the references and the handcrafting of every space and all of these curated little moments that are all referencing something within the Silent Hill universe.
Yeah.
And those deja vu effects, which are diegetic, because Maria also at one point experiences it with you, and she
Yeah.
goes, "Oh, that was deja vu." Like
Yep.
they are actually what the characters are reliving, and the sort of ideal or projected player is reliving or remembering is Silent Hill 2, the original. So
Oh,
those things happen whenever there is some sort of difference between Silent Hill 2 and the remake and the original, and you see the trace of the original and actually the characters remembering. So a good example, I think, is that fence. I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure that the fence in the original Pyramid Head pushes you through the fence, not down the shaft. And so when you look at that broken fence, which is importantly broken, right? So the idea
right.
is that actually this did happen.
This is already
You
happening.
know,
Yeah.
yeah. And James is remembering it, diegetically. And my favorite from, just because it's very simple and it's very early, is in the original Silent Hill 2. The dumpster puzzle happens right outside the apartments. And when you enter the Blue Creek and Woodside apartment complex, you I don't think this is not how it works in the remake, but you sort of go through this chain link fence and then you're in this kind of alleyway, like driveway courtyard sort of thing. It's just kind of just like an alleyway sidewalk area, fenced
Uh-huh.
off sidewalk area, entryway area basically outdoors, and you can actually walk in front of both apartments. So that game reinforces even more strongly that there are these two contiguous physical spaces, even though the nature of those spaces seems to be utterly opposed or different. And the dumpster is kind of sitting right in between the two buildings, I want to say, or at least in the middle section of the Woodside apartments. So it's just right outside out front. And so when you go to that dumpster or when you go to the space where the dumpster is supposed to be in the remake, you do get a deja vu effect. And there is nothing like creepy. There's no blood. There's no anything that would sort of make it feel like um, this singular sort of portentous moment. And that's one of the things that I think is so incredible about these deja vu moments is that they're often about these actually really quotidian things that seem utterly unremarkable. Because in my experience, when I've had deja vu, it's been about these like totally sort of repetitious, unremarkable, unmarked things. It's not like the traumatic or significant or like deep, or the punctum or whatever. It's not the thing that's like left this deep impression on you. It's the totally almost unnoticed that then repeats in an uncanny way. And what James is remembering and what the game is remembering in the player is simply that that's the location where the dumpster puzzle used to be. And in fact, there are plenty of places in the remake where you see a lot of the puzzles have been subbed out. So you have the puzzles are just different.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you see the remains of the Silent Hill 2 version, the original version of the puzzle. So you'll like see the puzzle pieces for some, I'm forgetting specific examples, but you'll see like the ruined whatever dolls or whatever that you had to use. I'm just kind of inventing a hypothetical example that you had to use before you would arrange in the original game to progress through a door, but you'll just see the kind of broken dolls in the corner of a room, um, as if, they'd already been used, or the game remembers the fact that you once used those items as objects, 25 years ago or whatever, 20 years ago, to progress through the same space. So it is like it's a really deep thing where it's like both, um, yeah, I mean, I think it's implying some kind of time loop structure or eternal recurrence on the level of the fiction, but it's of course also like it's also referencing between games, between actual works, between the remake and and the original. I alluded to in the last pod that it was doing something similar to what the Final Fantasy remake series does. And I guess sorry I'm going so long, but I'll just wrap up this monologue by just noting that the sort of the great spoilers for the remake series, but the brilliant twist of that first game, Final Fantasy remake, is that this has been pointed out by many people. It's quite obvious once you finish it that the remake in the title is not sort of product or work level label. Like it's not describing the artifact itself. It's
Yeah.
actually diegetic. That Final Fantasy remake is a sequel where Sephiroth is trying to remake the events of the first game, but in a way that he wins.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the game is actually like recreating or revisiting diegetically everything that happened in the first game in a kind of like multiversal mode.
Right.
Um, and so there are lots of moments where there's like maybe one character seems like maybe she's aware of all the different timelines, and so we'll ha have these moments where she discerns differences between them, or at least maybe it doesn't work quite that way, but there's a sense of just like equivalent fictional reality of both the remake and the original game, even though you're basically just retracing the steps of the original game. And that's definitely happening here too, and
Hmm.
quite on the margins in a very subtle way, which I also something I really appreciate. Like it's not hitting you over the head with it. It's not called like Silent Hill Return or whatever,
Right.
Silent Hill 2 Deja Vu. It's much more implicit, and much more marginal.
Yeah, I love all that. I mean, I'll just quickly say again, I know I've already told you this, but I love your piece on the Final Fantasy VII remake. Just a really beautiful piece that we should talk about, I guess, pretty soon when we do talk about Final Fantasy VII.
When it's out, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but um I guess like, you know, I like the idea that these kind of things that are, diegetic within the games, but are also jumping between games and are also oftentimes, in some cases kind of depend on paratext a little bit, like
Mhm.
I feel like what that does maybe is like make something like these instances of deja vu have like almost a threefold, like you said, you kind of point out that there's the suggestion of a time loop, but there's also a kind of inter game or, whatever, like this kind of referencing across iterations of the game. But then there's also just simply like uh the just the simple fact of the experience of deja vu, right? Like I like that they're not necessarily like I guess what I mean is the only meaning they have is a meaning that we need to zoom out to see. If that makes sense. So they're not like the moments of deja vu then you're saying in the remake are not like relevant actually to the events of the game or even really the lore of the game beyond simply just what happened in the first like the original version of the game. I don't know
Right.
what that means logically, but that to me is just really fascinating. The idea that James could be, maybe remembering, but actually like not quite remembering because deja vu is not a memory, right? Like it's not the same thing as having a memory, really.
Yeah, it's precisely the feeling of not knowing if you're having a memory.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and as I
exactly.
say this, we just keep saying the word déjà vu again. Like Sam Tet is writing a book on memory in the Victorian novel and has a whole chapter at least on déjà vu. So maybe we should just bring her on to talk about déjà vu at some point
Yeah,
as well.
definitely.
But yeah, like I think uh, for me, when I've had it, like it's a sense of it's not like, oh, I'm having a memory of doing this. It's like it's actually you're just actually it's deeply ambiguous whether you've even had that, whether it's actually happened before, or whether you're just it's a sort of psychical effect that is
Yeah.
producing a recognition that's illusory. And the only thing I'll add is that with this sort of intertextual relationship, it becomes a sort of tripartite effect. So it's like an ambiguity on the level of character, like between it's like, A, is this a memory or is this just the illusion of a memory? But then it's like, is this a memory? The memory part itself is subdivided ambiguously between something that
Right.
actually happened before or a different version of this representation of what happened before, i.e., Silent Hill 2 from 2001.
Yeah.
So it's like deja vu or deja vu squared or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Or as I remember from my like middle school or high school, as one of my classmates once said, and maybe this is what we could call it, déjà vu, mistakenly.
Deja vu is awesome. I love
Yeah.
that. Um,
No, but I think like maybe sticking with deja vu for a second, and bringing it back to some of what we've already said about anonymity and homogeneity. I mean, it strikes me too that, as a kind of aesthetic experience, right? Deja vu is an experience of like extreme specificity. Like I
Hmm.
think that that's partly, not that there's I mean the logic of deja vu is obscure itself, right? Like it's not just as it is in the game. It's always unclear what's causing it, if there is a cause, or if it's just kind of a, coincidental thing that happens. But either way, I mean the fact that and I do think this is also like true of aesthetic experience more broadly. What happens in the game is that we do like you have to click out to get out of the moment of deja vu, right? So when you click, the button or whatever X or something to trigger it, when you see one of the areas or sites that is going to kind of give James this deja vu, you just kind of stay there and nothing happens. It just kind of, as you said, it like shifts the perspective a little bit, and there's this little sound that plays. Um, but if you don't like click out of it, you just kind of stay in that moment, which I really like as a kind of almost like interpretive pausing that can only kind of happen when we do have this remove of playing the game, or you know or looking back at an aesthetic experience in memory after the fact, or I mean, this is something that we've, I think, talked about in terms of close reading, right? Like when you're close reading, what you're doing is totally different from when you're actually just sitting down and reading chronologically through a novel, right? You're taking it out of context and you're kind of like slowing way down and
Yeah.
blowing it up a little bit. So there is
And
this
you're
like,
also enhancing repetition. I mean, it's a
yeah,
fundamental axis of how close reading works is looking for repetition.
yeah, totally. Yeah. And so I think, yeah, those kind of tie-ins are really interesting to me, but they also, again, like this, I'm kind of, fascinated for whatever reason with the idea that and this is ties in a little bit too with the what we were talking about a little bit last time about about Lynch and this idea that there is something psychological about the game, but we're not really having it explained to us, which is what I think makes it so compelling. There's something about a lack of origin or kind of an empty origin or something
Yeah.
that I think really can drive a lot of works of art, and I think it's true of at least so far for me, it's true of this Silent Hill remake.
Yeah. Well, I mean, lack of origin is a great transition point to the Bennett Sim story, actually,
Sure.
with its sort of Derridian theory of the postcard, for one. But let me just, I want to just like close the book on a couple of threads because a bunch of things occurred to me as you were talking. One, okay, let me just see if I can keep them all in mind too. Okay, number one, going all the way back to when you mentioned paratext, and the kind of, right, again, like the sort of the diegetic repetition, but then the repetition between artifacts.
Yeah.
Um, I paused for a second and then I did remember again from that same video that I sent you, the Dan Allen Gaming 115 cool little details. There's this key moment that I won't spoil later on, but it involves like this door full of arms.
Hmm.
So it's like a door where there's just limbs sort of like kind of spilling out and sort of almost like writhing, almost like antennae or something.
Wow.
You have to progress through this door of limbs. Amazing. Like, yeah, door of limbs is the most Silent Hill phrase, you know. But actually, that is a reference, as I learned from this video, not to Silent Hill 2, the original, but to the trailer for Silent Hill 2, because it had this like it's like very, it's more, I don't even know what the word is. It's like kind of grungy, like music video vibe, of for this 2000 or 2001 trailer with
Yeah.
like all these just like limbs kind of writhing around in this like kind of almost corny, like sepia tone color, I think. It
Yeah.
almost looks like I don't know, like a Nickelback video or something. But that's actually, I mean, so you have this like really, really pivotal moment that's I think is new in the remake, that is dredging up something from the trailer, from the promotional material for the original game, not from something that was actually experienced by anyone in the original game, any of the characters. Um, and that
Yeah.
brings me to the second thing, which is one more thing on deja vu, which is you mentioned that Yeah, you have to press X to end the effect because am I right that the camera changes, right? You have a kind of fixed angle or
Yeah,
the
and you can't move.
refocuses.
Yeah.
And sometimes it includes James in the frame, right?
Yep.
um, which is amazing because it's just like that sort of mise en abîme thing that we were describing last time, like the red square and then the red image of James in the menu screen of the original game, where
Mm.
you're like both identifying with James through the static, but also being utterly divorced from James's psyche because you're looking at James, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And that the deja vu thing's doing something really similar, right? Like, I mean, ostensibly, I think I would assume, or rather, presumably, part of what's motivating the camera shift is what you called like that sort of crucial aspect of extreme specificity to deja vu, like that you're what it's sort of like what it's the entire it's the but the it's the total particularity of the experience or image that triggers
Yeah.
it. So we need to have the same camera angle. In fact, I think. I would guess that in some cases at least, the camera angle is replicating precisely the camera angle from the original game.
Hmm.
So the deja vu effect again is an effect of psychic identification with the avatar, with the protagonist. Like James feels deja vu and we feel deja vu. And yet, sometimes the way that we feel deja vu as players is precisely to see James,
Hmm.
to see James externalized within the shot, which is not an experience that James could ever have.
Right.
So the particularity of the thing that evokes the this sort of memory phenomenon is something actually totally individual to us as the player and totally right, extrinsic from James's psychic life. So it's again identification and anti-identification at the same time,
Yeah.
um, in a really productive, complicated, sort of reflexive or recursive way. I love that about the game.
Yeah, and maybe just to add on a tiny bit more and just kind of again, I do feel like we could continue talking about this game a lot. I mean, it's an incredibly generative game, I think, for just thinking about games more broadly. But anyway, I mean the singularity or the particularity that we've been talking about with specifically with deja vu, I guess, is also, I would say, not at all, it actually goes hand in hand with anonymity, Like I think that and I know that you've written about this a bit elsewhere, but the question of identification in terms of like psychological identification, like I still, and we've kind of joked about this even, but I still like have no clue, and I think this is obviously kind of the point, but James is a totally, even though some of his, like dialogue or some of the things that he kind of says to himself can be pretty corny, I still have like no clue what kind of dude this is, Like there's kind of like no like, so he does feel like anonymous and even like oddly affectless, I mean, of course he's going through, and this is just a classic, of course, thing that happens in games anyway, right? I mean, if your character actually reacted realistically to everything that happens, you wouldn't be able to progress through the game or something, like, so of course James, is walking around, getting ambushed, getting attacked, fighting these crazy things. I mean, there's a guy with a there's this guy called Pyramid Head, which is some of the just one of the most bizarre and I can't tell if it's comical or terrifying or both. I think it's maybe both, but and yet, when you see James, he just seems confused. He seems like a total like a cipher, or kind of like a blank slate or, this kind of totally anonymous guy, like he has no qualities or something like that, right? And yet he's still incredibly specific. His experience is incredibly specific. And I think that specificity is actually heightened by not giving us by not explaining things, right? By having this uncertainty and by having these moments of deja vu that could mean a bunch of different things, could mean nothing, could be, a reference back to the original game, which is also just kind of impossible, like James doesn't know that he's in a remake, right? But diegetically that could just as you said, like it could also be a signal that there's a kind of time loop structure. And so all of those things existing, maybe ties in nicely with the architecture too, as we've been saying. Like these places are totally homogeneous, totally anonymous, but they can be kind of overlaid onto each other. Something can happen and you can just be in like an alternate version of it from there on out.
Yeah.
And I also think that it's really good. Like I think one of the things, and I know that, maybe we do want to move on to talk about the story a little bit in just a moment, but one of the things that we mentioned and I do think is worth noting is like how things are gated in the game. And there are a lot of I mean one thing I'll say that it's one of the things that I both love and find really frustrating about like the Souls games is that you can oftentimes go in multiple different directions, at any given point. And of course, there is like a skill gating, that happens, which, unless you're somebody who can play as like the essentially nude character with like no skills or whatever and beat the whole game that way. Uh,
Yeah,
most of
no
the
skill.
players.
That's the best Ash of War in Elden Ring. I'm not even joking because having the no skill Ash of War is what allows you to sort of choose which sort of lets you curate your L2 on your, not to get too granular, on your right hand weapon. If you have a shield, you want to have the no skill so that
Right,
you can not be triggering your stupid shield kick or whatever when you want to
right,
be
right.
super move.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, I guess I'm just saying, like in those games, you can sort of go in a bunch of different directions at once, and especially the first time you ever play them, it can be confusing. It can be kind of daunting, right? It can get a little bit jumbled in your head, especially because the Souls games are games that you can't pause. So if you're trying to find your way around, it can be just incredibly, you really have to, um, I mean, that itself takes a lot of repetition, I guess. But in Silent Hill, I mean, there's the gating is pretty specific and you can get to a bunch of locked doors, I guess, from the very beginning, but which one you actually go through is you have to do things in a pretty specific order most of the time. And additionally, there's like reverse gating that happens where, you'll like oftentimes at least two or three times I've like jumped through a window, like an open window, and then the window will slam shut, or you go through a door and the door will slam shut and you can't open it again. And so it seems that there are a lot of kind of points of no return, which I think obviously has a diegetic function, but formally I think is really interesting to think about in terms of gating because, a lot of games have things like this, right? I mean, un undoable actions or whatever, but also I think it's even more interesting sometimes when it's like actually a space that you just can't go back to
Yeah,
once you
I mean, for
pass
sure,
it.
it definitely like in a game like Silent Hill where you're constantly retracing the same spaces. I
Yeah,
and in that case, the notion of the point of no return becomes newly meaningful. It
right.
relates back to déjà vu. It relates to the idea of like it's a deviation from, in a way, the norm in this game of deja vu, where we're constantly also just like walking through the same rooms over and over again. Especially if you're like missing a puzzle piece or you can't figure out a puzzle. I mean, I had one moment where I was just really stupid and didn't see this one. I explored every inch of this building, but this one door that I was supposed to go into to get like a crank or something. Maybe
Yeah.
it was wire cutters. This is very Resident Evil.
Uh,
Uh, and I just was walking through the same rooms and same halls over and over again. But the point of no return is precisely where formally that usually just means like, oh, this is the quest where you can't go to the open world anymore. But point of no return is much more granular and specific in Silent Hill 2. It is about like entering a room that you'll go through many times, but that where the door shuts behind you and you can't go back to the other rooms that you went through many times. Um,
yeah, yeah.
I
I
do have a proposal. Oh, go ahead.
I also well, I was just gonna say quickly, I also think that it's somehow this is like a hunch, maybe I don't have the idea figured out yet, but I do think that somehow this notion of gating, the point of no return, the fact that you're constantly walking through the same spaces and they either will change or you can't go back to them or something. seems to me still like, again, I know we keep talking about anonymity, but it seems again like another almost emphasizing factor for the anonymity of the game. Like that, I guess the more that I'm playing and the more that we're talking about it, I think that anonymity is like just incredibly important to the game. And again, both like diegetically and formally, maybe part of what it's pointing out is that, and this is like a simple point, I guess, but is that something can both be and not be what it is or what it seems to be. And I don't simply just mean like, oh, this is a dream or this is, this is James's psyche projected into, or whatever, I also think that there's like a, to have a, I mean, anonymity literalized in these kind of featureless enemies that both keep repeating, but the fact that they're featureless makes their repetition like something else, right? It's not simply just the same thing over and over again. There's still, there's a singular anonymity to them that their kind of featurelessness makes possible. Because it kind of it reminds me of games like this is a totally different genre of game, but I don't know if you ever played Streets of Rage, the old. Have you played those?
It's Rage season, dude. No, I haven't played Streets of Rage, but I'm familiar with the text.
Yeah, but like Streets of Rage, but also actually the fact that you mentioned Rage Season, which is a reference that I was making to Dynasty Warriors Origins, which nice tie-in with the term origin. I mean, both Streets of Rage and Dynasty Warriors and a ton of other games feature these hordes of enemies that are they're anonymous in a different way, right? They have faces, but it's just the same guy over and over and over again, right? And only the bosses are distinguished at all. But they do have features and they do have, they even have names. And in Streets of Rage, the funniest thing is that you kind of just walk around, you walk through these levels. It's kind of a side-scrolling, like, whatever fighting game. In all the enemies, they do have names, but the names will repeat. So you'll eventually like beat up a bunch of guys named Joseph, for example. Uh, but yeah, I think like the fact that there are only so far, at least, I think I've only met what like three other human characters in Silent Hill, and everything else is this kind of uh yeah, just these kind of featureless, ominous things that both have like a kind of uncanny effect, but also seem to, I don't know, seem to add a little bit to the logic and again to like double down on this idea that uh things both are and are not what they seem, and they maybe do have, they might or might not have an explanation. I guess that's maybe where I'll leave it for now. But
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, just to loop it back to what you said about James as being both anonymous and particular or individual, I think you said, and that's totally right. Like, even his character design is incredibly sort of ideologically unmarked. He's
right.
just like kind of handsome blonde man. He looks like he's almost like the doppelganger of Leon Kennedy from
Yeah.
Resident Evil, who's also just like basically a, as the kids say, like a default. Like
Yeah.
he's like the character creator of default setting. That just this sort of white guy, handsome white guy, right? Default video game protagonist.
Yeah.
Um, and and yet what makes James like part of what makes him so particular is that he's default or anonymous in such an individual way. And that way is partly by being this sort of dissociated, semi-concussed like ball of like male like repressed rage and desire, or frustrated desire. Like it's just there's something so chilling and disturbing about his specificity, but it is specificity,
Yeah.
and that's what makes him a kind of a very powerful generic avatar. He's like the a specific expression of the generic avatar.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
so my proposal is that I think we should wrap here because we've
Okay.
already gone long, and I want to give Sims's story like the sort of the space and attention it deserves.
Sure.
But I thought before we wrap, maybe I'll just read one very quick little passage because it's about deja vu, and I think maybe it can be a nice sort of bridge to our next episode. So it
Sure.
seems like it's like form replicating content or the um the interpretation replicating the text itself. But I think we had planned to end our Silent Hill discussion here, but it turns out we're not ending. We're going
Yeah.
back to Nathan Ave one more time at least. Maybe this is we're never going to leave Silent Hill. This will just become Authors Die Twice will become the Silent Hill podcast. Um, but I'll just read this bit from the beginning. I don't think we even need to contextualize the story very much, just to say that it's a sort of yeah, it's an homage to Silent Hill 2, using a very similar scenario where a character receives a postcard from his wife who is supposed to be dead. And in the story, it seems the narrator, main character, seems to be an investigator who's gone to find out if this person's alive or how they sent this
Hmm.
letter, postcard. Um, and he has this postcard with an image of the environment around this town he's going to. And this is from the beginning as he's driving to the town. Soon I thought, sorry, I kept glancing out the window expectantly, waiting to recognize the stretch of coastline from the postcard. Soon I thought I would enter the image. And that's sort of what we're doing, right, in these deja vu moments of the remake. Like we're entering the image being what was on screen, the image, right? The representation of
Hmm.
this experience in the original Silent Hill.
Yeah.
Um, Soon I thought I would enter the image, and then without my noticing when it had happened, the landscape had become familiar to me. To my right, I saw the bleak beach of gray rocks, a dark bank of clouds far out over the water, and for the moment I had the distinct impression that I had been there before. It was the same strand from the postcard. I had crossed over that border that separates what is familiar from what is strange. I had trespassed into the terrain or the district of déjà vu. I think there's a lot to say about that passage. The
Yeah.
thing that strikes me right now is this strange doubling, right? The terrain or the district. Like,
Mm.
why the two? Why not just the terrain? Why not the space, right?
Right.
Um, what does it mean to have them both? What's the distinction being made there? So maybe we can begin with this scene next pod. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see how we feel. Um, but I'd
I
say let's just leave off. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'll just say too that I'll maybe propose that we also think about uh just the idea of the image in Silent Hill, because the image is obviously, I mean, we've been talking about it already with these kind of deja vu moments, but also uh there are the strange photographs that you keep finding, which is another thing that we haven't really mentioned yet, that
Oh
feel.
yeah. I completely forgot. And I didn't even I meant to look up what those are and I never did. So I to this day I have no idea what those photos are doing.
Yeah, so maybe thinking about the story, which has like several actually moments where there's this kind of idea of entering into an image, but also bringing it back. I think we'll just have to have another whole discussion on Silent Hill, and by whatever point that is, I will have played a bunch more of it again. So yeah, that sounds good to me.
Sounds good, man. Well, as always, on the third floor of Blue Creek Apartments, there's a special item. You want to keep that magic lantern that you pick up nice and lit.
Will do. Thank you.